So, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, I'm sorry. That's right, we've had the time change, haven't we? Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Contemporary Issues Committee, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Before I do that, I'd like to remind you that the chair of the Contemporary Issues Committee, Sarah Holmes, who is here somewhere over there, is soliciting suggestions for next year's series. So if you have an idea of something you would like to hear about at one of our monthly meetings, please make that suggestion to Sarah, and especially if you have a particular speaker you would like to recommend. That would be wonderful, and we'll bear that in mind at our next meeting, which is this week. So, I'm thrilled to introduce today's speaker, whom I've known for a long time, not professionally, I would add, but personally. As some of you will know, I live in that northern tier of Washtenaw County and work here on campus. And so every day as I drive to work or as I drive around my neighborhood, I'm struck with the fact that more and more farmland is disappearing. More and more family farms that once sustained many people and are now completely unsustainable as a whole way of life are disappearing as more and more houses are built in a logic that maybe isn't so very, very logical. Our speaker today is one of the leading participants in the movement to preserve some of the green space that still surrounds our towns. And Barry Lonik, today's speaker, has been involved in that movement for a long time with great success. One of the most successful programs in Michigan is responsible in Washtenaw County for the preservation of a great deal of farmland, and Barry has played a leading role in that for many years. He started the Legacy Land Conservancy, which many of you have probably read about in recent months and years, and served as its first executive director for 6.5 years, developing it into an effective, durable, non-profit organization. He was also the primary advocate for public funding of land preservation in our county, and has been involved with 14 ballot campaigns, 13 of which were won. And they will raise over $200 million for the acquisition of land and conservation easements. He's currently president of Treemore Ecology and Land Services, Inc., consulting with non-profits, local governments, private landowners, and conservation buyers towards the protection of natural and agricultural lands. Through his direct involvement, almost 9,300 acres of land have been permanently protected, mostly in and around our county. And he's attracted over $24 million of state and federal grants for farmland protection. We should clearly get him involved in raising money for our church. He completed a master's degree in resource policy from our local institution, the University of Michigan, at the SNRE, the School of Natural Resources and the Environment, following up a bachelor's degree from Albion College in a self-designed environmental studies curriculum. He's always been a self-starter, as you can see. He resides in Dexter Township, where he grows most of his own produce, hosts concerts in his house and in his 150-year-old barn, and, as he himself puts it in this short bio, frequents local trails, streams, and lakes as often as possible. Please welcome Barry Lonik, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are we doing on tech? Good? Cool. Nice to see you all. A couple of familiar faces. I'm pleased to share with you this morning some of the amazing successes that we've had here in Washtenaw County in terms of saving those precious farmland and natural resource lands that we have around us. So my focus this morning is going to be on the publicly funded land preservation programs that exist here in Washtenaw County. We'll talk about the City of Ann Arbor's Greenbelt program, which has been in place now for 20 years and has another 10 years yet to go. We'll talk a little bit about the successful campaigns that have been waged in some of the surrounding townships for also about 20 years. That's Ann Arbor, Scioto, and Webster townships. And then more recently, we have some new programs that have come online with public funding. That's in Dexter Township, where Michael and I live, and also Northfield Township. So there's been emerging concern about land use going back for a long time in Washtenaw County, going back to the early 80s. And it was about the mid-90s that folks like myself and others banded with farmers recognized that we have a major problem with the conversion of the landscape, agricultural lands and natural areas, into more developed uses, if you will, subdivisions, strip malls, and so forth. And so we recognized we had some common ground there, and we decided to start working together. In 1997, we approached the County Board of Commissioners to put a proposal on the ballot to fund land preservation for the first time. The County Board created a task force to study the issue, and recommendations from that task force were to put some proposals on the ballot to fund land preservation. And that first proposal happened in 1998. It was countywide. It was the first countywide proposal in the state of Michigan. There were 4 recommendations that came out of this county task force. One was for a ballot proposal to fund farmland preservation. Another one was a ballot proposal to fund natural area preservation. One was to reshift some dollars in county government around to focus on brownfield redevelopment in urban areas that have been out of use, to reuse those areas. And the fourth part of it, the fourth recommendation, was to also shift some county money around to help townships in the more rural areas that don't have planning staff and good planning and zoning documents to support them in that regard. Well, the county board decided they're going to lump all 4 of those things together and put it into one ballot proposal, which voters found confusing. And in addition to that, we ran into some very well-funded opposition from the Home Builders Association and the Board of Realtors. So that countywide proposal was for 10 years. It was 4/10 of a mil. It was proposed to generate about $40 million. And as I said, all those 4 things went into the proposal that voters were asked to consider and vote on. The farmland preservation part of it was a new concept for our area. It had been done in other parts of the country for a number of years, but there really weren't any local examples here to point to, and that's what the opposition focused their campaign on. So we ran a campaign, what we call a SAFE campaign. We were informed by a poll that we did early on in the process that we had voters behind us. Over 70% said in a pre-election poll they support this proposal. And so the advice from our national experts was just run a SAFE campaign and you should win this pretty easily. What we didn't anticipate fully was the opposition of the builders and realtors, who were able to amass large sums of money, $330,000 total, in a very short period of time and in a few checks, basically. The National Association of Home Builders provided a $50,000 check, the State Association $40,000, the local association $30,000, the Board of Realtors kicked in another $30,000 or $40,000. So in a very short period of time, a large sum of money was available to them, whereas we were asking everybody for $20. Can I get $20 from you? And eventually we raised our own pretty good-sized pot of funds. I think it was $220,000 ultimately, but in dribs and drabs, and didn't really allow us to do the kinds of campaign that we needed to do in this sense. One of the things that we underestimated was the power of television. And the fact that they had a lot of money and were going to use television. And there was an ad, like a 30-second ad that had 3 older farmers who all happened to be my neighbors. And they were in opposition to it. And they got up there and said, "This is a bad deal for farmers and you should vote against this." And it made a huge impact. I never saw that television ad, fortunately, but it ran like 1 million times. And it was also on the radio as well. I did hear it on the radio. So that was we did the grassroots thing, they did the mass market thing. We did direct mail, they did television. We had our slogan of preserve our heritage. Their slogan was, "There's a better way." And of course we kept saying, "So what's your better way?" And they never had one. But people said, "Well, I don't understand this very much, and there's a better way, so I'm going to vote against this one." And we lost that one 58-42. So a dramatic turnaround from the poll that we conducted in August of the year to the November vote of that year. We did a post-election poll also and asked voters if they knew who funded the opposition, and they did not. They did a very good job, what we call a green scam campaign, where they sort of hid behind the farmers and the better way, and were successful in not identifying who was funding it, and we didn't call them out. And that was one of the key factors we found. But the only two places that we won the vote, where there were more yes votes than no votes, countywide. So there's 20 townships in Washtenaw County. There's several cities as well, Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, Saline, and so forth. Of all the political jurisdictions, the only places that we got more yes votes than no votes was the city of Ann Arbor and Ann Arbor Township. So we stuck that in the back of our heads to come back to at a future time. So to our great credit, we didn't give up at that point. The next year, there was a drive to renew a millage, a parks acquisition millage here in the city of Ann Arbor that was about to expire. It had been approved in 5-year increments going back, I think, to the 1970s. And that was about to expire. It didn't look like city council was going to put it on the ballot to be voted on again by the citizens, and local groups, the Ecology Center, the Sierra Club, in particular, went door to door and collected signatures from registered voters and forced that onto the ballot that year. That's possible to do in cities that have charters that allow for that to happen. It's not true for the county or for townships. So that got onto the ballot. That won with great success, no opposition to that. And then we continued to build our coalition going into 2000, where we reminded the home builders and realtors that they did not oppose natural area preservation in the ballot proposal. They were really focused on the farmland part of it. And that, of course, is because farmland's already been cleared, right? You can go in and build houses tomorrow. And if it's got those pesky trees on it, and those worthless wetlands, you got stuff to do. It costs money. So that was why they were opposed to that. But they said, we're all in favor of this natural area preservation thing back in '98. So we came back to them in 2000 and said, so, remember that? You said that you were in support of that. And they went, yeah, I suppose we did. And so we went to the County Board of Commissioners again and put a proposal on the ballot just to fund natural area preservation here in the county, and didn't have any opposition. And that one won with tremendous support. So that was a 10-year millage initially for a quarter of a mil. Passed with 64% of the votes countywide. And I think we won, in contrast to the '98 proposal, I think there was only one township of all the political jurisdictions in the county that voted no for that proposal. That all the other cities and townships voted in favor of it. So, dramatic turnaround for that. And I think a large part of that was that even though we lost that campaign in '98, we had done a great job of educating the public. That was back when we had, you remember this, a daily newspaper. Do you remember that? And it was in the news all the time. And so even though we lost the campaign, we sort of, informed people. So when we came back a couple of years later, people said, yeah, I'm all in favor of that. So we won with 64%. We got $30 million to purchase land and conservation easements, which I'll talk about more in a bit, and to focus on environmentally sensitive lands across the county. That program has been in place now for over 20 years and is managed by Washtenaw County Parks. And as a result of that, we have 35 new nature preserves here in Washtenaw County. They're scattered throughout the whole county. And those are publicly accessible properties. They have little parking areas and kiosks with information and maps and so forth, and trails that go through the property. They're not more developed properties. There's no potties. There's no playground equipment. It's a natural area that you can go and visit. And there's some extraordinarily beautiful areas on rivers and old-growth forests, and just all kinds of stuff all over the county as a result of that initial county campaign. But we all recognized that farmland was still being threatened on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and so we needed to do something about that as well. So again, not getting discouraged, actually having now some encouragement by having won a countywide proposal, we went back to that '98 proposal and said, so what were the two places that won more votes than yes, more yes votes than no? It was the city of Ann Arbor and Ann Arbor Township. And so we put proposals on the ballots in both of those jurisdictions. So Ann Arbor Township is mostly north of the city here. There's some on the east side of the city as well. But the land, farmland and natural areas is in the north part of the township. north of the city here. So we went on different ballots, but at the same time in November of 2003 with the Ann Arbor Parks and Greenbelt millage, which was for 30 years, a half a mil. So it was actually an extension of that 1999 Parks acquisition millage that we got onto the ballot by collecting signatures, but extending it for 30 years instead of just 5 years and expanding the use of those funds. So a third of the funds can still be used here in the city to purchase land for parks, but 2/3 of the funds can be used outside the city to assist in the conservation of lands, either by the city itself or in partnership with other local entities. So that went on the ballot, and then in Ann Arbor Township, same deal. We went to 20 years for that proposal, and that was just to preserve farmland and open space through conservation easements. That's going to generate about $8 million. We just had our last collection in Ann Arbor Township. The city program has another 10 years to go, but on that date, before I get to the results of that, we learned our lessons from the '98 campaign. We assumed that the home builders would run a similar kind of campaign to what they did previously because they got an award from the National Association of Home Builders. Honest to God. And we were correct, and we learned our lessons by not calling them out. And so we developed our own rapid-fire campaign. We intentionally put the proposals on the ballot late, as late as we could, so they would have as little time as possible. They didn't know it was coming until it was there. And we quickly organized our campaign and fundraising committees. We hired a consultant and said, we want you to, we're taking off the gloves this time. We're not messing around. And so we caught them by surprise. They still raised a bunch of money, and they still ran another television ad, which this time was a woman in her kitchen and saying, I kind of like this idea of saving land, but I don't think this, sort of the same message. I don't think this is the right proposal, and there was a couple of different variations of that. And so one of the things that we did was grab the picture, the still shot of that, and then put it into our ad. So the first 2 seconds or so was their ad, and then we jumped in and said, stop, this is funded by the home builders, and you guys hate the home builders, the developers. And then this is one of our postcards here, but same kind of message. It's like, this is who this is, tearing away the curtain. And here's another one that we did. Great stuff. I mean, just really brilliantly done. So those went out in postcards. We had our television ads. We had lots of other campaign materials that we produced. We talked about all these key messages. We're not raising taxes. This is a renewal of something you've been paying since the 1970s. Everybody doesn't like sprawl out in the countryside. This is a way to combat that. We have broad support from various populations and so forth. John Heftia, who was the mayor at that time, was a key spokesman for us. We had a debate of the two positions at the Michigan Theater, and 1,000 people came to that. It was extraordinary. I mean, I walked in and went, what the heck's going on here, 1,000 people came to that, and it was just a really wonderful thing. We got great media coverage again. We matched their campaign contributions this time. We got great support from the business sector. We did all these different things, had good voter lists, all those things that you do to run a successful campaign. We learned our lessons and applied them in this case. And really, the developers' campaign was focused on the Greenbelt program. They didn't really care much about Ann Arbor Township, but the Ann Arbor Greenbelt program potentially had a huge impact, and that's where they focused their efforts. And then we won. And not only won, but in the Ann Arbor, 67%, 2/3 of the people who showed up that day to vote, voted in favor of that proposal for a 30-year millage. In Ann Arbor Township, it was 77%. So, we learned our lessons and we won. Extremely satisfying. And then things didn't stop there. I mean, that was great that we had those millages in place. But Scioto Township, which is west of the city here, also had been sort of stewing on these kinds of issues for a while. The Greenbelt boundary initially went to Zeeb Road, which is halfway through Scioto Township, and it went north to North Territorial Road, more or less, which is like the equivalent of halfway, up through the townships up that way. So initially, half of the township was covered by the Greenbelt proposal, and I think people in Scioto said, well, geez, if Ann Arbor's going to give us money to conserve land, then shit, let's put some on the table also. So we went to the voters in November of 2004 in Scioto Township for a $500,000, 10-year millage, $6 million generated. One was 75% support there for a new tax. Ann Arbor Township was also a new tax. So that just indicated to us that people want this to happen. They're willing to put some money on the table to to offer an alternative to development. And then Webster Township, the next year in 2005, and if you all know Webster Township, it's a rural area. There's no commercial businesses, there's no industry there. It's farms and houses basically, and a party store and a couple of other things. But it's basically a very rural township. And the catalyst for Webster Township in part was the Greenbelt millage, because that covered about a third of Webster Township. But also there was, and this also happens in other communities I've seen too, there was a proposal for a mobile home park development to go on a beautiful, huge piece of farmland. Longtime family farm, got offered by a mobile home park developer, and they signed up, went to the township, and said, we want to change the zoning and the master plan for this particular property. The township turned them down, the developer sued. A group of citizens rallied and supported the township, hired their own lawyers, and defeated that proposal. But then those citizens said, Scioto's got this millage now, and Ann Arbor Township and the city, we should do our own millage as well. And to their great credit, they then went to the township board and said, let's put something up on the ballot also. So we did that in 2005 in Webster Township, $500,000, about $1 million, being a more rural township, but 70% support. And then since then, we've had a slew of millage renewals. Webster's approved 2 millage renewals, Scioto Township now 2 millage renewals. Washtenaw County has twice renewed that millage, the 2000 millage. It was just for natural areas initially. Got renewed in 2010 and again in 2020. In 2010, for the county millage, we were able to convince the County Board of Commissioners that farmland is a natural resource. Seemed obvious, but that we actually had that written into the ordinance that directs the what's called the Natural Area Preservation Program, and that 25% of the funds could be used for farmland preservation, and that continues with the 2020 renewal as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Dexter Township and Northfield Townships, after a long break between having new millages placed on the ballot, got on the ballot just November of 22, and both of them won new taxes. And I was thrilled with our Dexter Township voters that if you're a new tax, but 63% of the people showed up and said yes to that. That floored me. And Northfield, which is a pretty conservative community, 54%, which is an enormous victory there as well. So now we've got, and there's actually one township in the southeast part of the county, Augusta Township, that passed a very small millage also some years ago. So we have 6 townships here in Washtenaw County. And there are 12 publicly funded land preservation programs in the entire state of Michigan. Between the 6 townships, the Greenbelt, and the county, we have 8 of them. There's 2 in the Traverse City area, there's Ingham County, and there's one in Saugatuck Township that just passed the millage in November 22. So of the 12 programs, we've got 8 of them. And so this is clearly the hot spot for this kind of activity. And one of the things that I learned in my Lands Conservancy days was that it's really hard to raise money for anything. But for land preservation, in a place like this, we've got beautiful, rolling agricultural landscapes, but so does everybody else in mid-Michigan, right? I would go to these conferences and hear people from the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy and the Leelanau Conservancy and the Little Traverse Conservancy talking about, oh, I just got 50 grand from so-and-so, and somebody just gave us, I'm like, how do I find this money? Well, I don't have any Great Lakes frontage. I don't have any sand dunes. I don't have people from Chicago coming up for their summer homes and so forth. What do I got here? I got farmland. And, some nice natural areas and nice rivers and stuff, but it's really hard. It was harder to sell that. And it became very clear that if we were going to have any impact in our community, we had to have public funding. And that's why we've pursued that so vigorously here. And we are finding that in other parts of the country, this is now serving as a model where people say, wait a minute, Ann Arbor tax themselves and they're spending money outside the city? It's really quite extraordinary. But people in Ann Arbor said, we have an identity, and we want to maintain that. And if there's sprawl everywhere, like there is in some places outside of Ann Arbor, then we lose that identity. And we're willing to put some money on the table and keep it. So, conservation easements. So there are times when Washtenaw County Parks, through the Natural Area Preservation Program, buys land as nature preserves. Scioto Township has done that also. In most cases, the means for conserving farmland and natural areas is what we call a conservation easement, where the landowner is conveying certain rights to the property but retaining other rights to the property and the ownership of the property. So this can be done by either purchasing those rights, or sometimes people will donate those rights, or they'll discount the sale price. The value of those rights is determined by an independent real estate appraiser who does 2 studies of the subject property. One of them is, what would the property be worth if you put it on the market today and a developer was going to buy it to build houses on it? That's the development value, or the before value of the property. And then he does a second study, same process, but says, I'm going to find properties that have sold, that have conservation easements that cannot be developed, and compare those. So what's the price of those properties? And by and large, these days, it's about $3,500 an acre for land as farmland or open space that cannot be developed. So we're paying the difference between $3,500 and whatever the development value is. And it's sometimes about a $10,000 difference these days. So the appraisal will say it's $13,500 as a development property and $3,500 as a conserved property, somewhere in the range of $8,000 to $10,000. Land remains in private ownership, stays on the tax rolls. That's something that we found was important with especially townships, to say, well, we don't want land coming off our tax rolls, even though it's a nice preserve and it's doing good things for the community and people can visit it and so forth. We're losing our tax revenue. In this case, we keep the land on the tax rolls and keep paying taxes with that. But it is a permanent deed restriction that's placed on the property. It runs as long as we have property in the United States. So this is a slide that we've used for years, just to give you an idea of how this thing works. As a landowner, you hold a whole bunch of different rights to a property. And you can exercise those rights, or you can convey certain rights to the property but retain other rights. And what we're after is the development rights, where as a landowner, you can divide your property into smaller parcels and build houses on it. You can make a gravel pit on your property if you meet the zoning regulations and all those kinds of things. But that is a right that you have as a property owner. If you have a woodlot on the property, you can clear cut that woodlot if you want to. That's a development right that you hold, and so forth. And so what we're doing in conservation easements is just taking away certain rights to the property and basically putting them away. They don't really exist anymore. And we then compensate the landowner for those rights by virtue of this real estate appraisal. So these are some of the values that we're endeavoring to conserve through conservation easements: prime agricultural soils, streams, habitat, wetlands, and so forth. These are the things that we call the conservation values, and that we identify in the conservation easement document and say, this is what we're endeavoring to protect. And so there's certain things you can do, but if you're trying to do things that are in violation of the conservation values, then we're going to stop you from doing that. The restrictions that are placed on the property is division into smaller parcels, commercial and industrial activities. In most cases, new structures are not permitted, although we do allow for a house to be built on the property in some instances. And if it's an agricultural property, we allow for agricultural buildings to be placed on the property as well. We're trying to limit impervious surfaces, rooftops, pavement, and so forth that runs off into our streams. Roads, no gravel mining, no dumping. Can't make a dump on your property. And if you've got a dump on your property, you've got to clean it up before we close as well. Motorized vehicles are allowed for agricultural use, for hunting access, for if you're managing a natural area, if you're tapping maple trees or you're collecting firewood. Those are all legitimate motorized vehicle uses, but not ATVs buzzing around the property or dirt bikes, that kind of thing, because that compacts the soil, it scares wildlife, it has negative impacts. And then these are all the things that we continue to allow on the property, where the rights the landowner had and continues to have: agricultural use, non-motorized recreation. You can lease it out to somebody else. You don't have to farm it yourself if it's an agricultural property. You can work on restoring natural areas in the property. You can convey it to anybody you want to. Kids, unrelated people, your church. It's just whoever owns the property from that point on is subject to the conservation easement deed restrictions from there. You can manage your woodlot. You can't clear cut it. You have to have a forest management plan by a registered forester. And if you've got structures on the property, you can maintain them or replace them, and in some cases, as I said, you can build some additional structures. One of the responsibilities of the grantee, so the landowner is the grantor, the grantee is then charged with monitoring the condition of the property in perpetuity. So one of the things that I do for my townships is once a year, I write a letter to the landowners and say, it's time for your annual monitoring visit, and I'll call you next week. Did you get the letter? Do you want to come with me? Is there a good time? Is there a bad time to come? And then I go walk around the property, and I'm like, well, there's no houses here, there's no gravel pits, they haven't clear cut the woods, they haven't filled the wetlands, there's no dumps, you're good. See you next year. That's the only sort of visit that I have to the property. We have, fortunately, only had a couple of instances where there have been violations of the easement, and we endeavor to correct those in a friendly manner. But in Scioto Township, we did have one case where the paragraph on forestry was not in the easement by request of the original grantor, who had passed away. But he said, if a tree falls, it should just feed the soil and the critters, and I don't want to have any trees cut on my property at all. He passed away. The executor of his estate allowed for trees to be cut on the property, 19 good-sized oaks and black walnuts. And unfortunately, it happened at a time when an oak, a fungal disease that's commonly called oak wilt, was around. And so we had to hire a consultant to go out and identify whether there was any oak wilt that showed up as a result of this logging operation. And there was. So we had to hire another outfit who came with this fascinating vehicle, 4 wheels but tracks rather than wheels, that could maneuver independently through the woods around the trees. And we borrowed this 6-foot-long, it was probably at the top, maybe 16, 18 inches wide, beveled blade that they then punched into the ground with a hydraulic and cut around the roots of the infected trees. Fortunately, there's only 2 of them, because the disease goes through the root systems and spreads to all, so you can lose a woods in a matter of a couple of years. And so we didn't want that to happen, and so we incurred the expense of doing that. We sued, and legal fees, yada, yada, all kinds of stuff. We sued the estate and won. So we got a settlement out of it, but the trees are gone. It's still a very nice property, and it's actually then purchased by the city of Ann Arbor and transferred to Washtenaw County, so it will be a nature preserve that we can all go to visit sometime soon. But unfortunately, we had to go through that experience. It's the kind of thing we don't want to have happen, because it's expensive and you may not win. That's always a risk when you go to court. So one of the things that I do and my counterparts at the Greenbelt in the county is build relationships with people and say, you might be the original grantor, you might not be. We just want to make sure you understand what the document says and what you can do and what you can't do. If you got any questions, here's my number. And by and large, we've succeeded in avoiding any other problems. But we do have the standing in the conservation easement to pursue our legal remedies, if necessary. So the way that these programs work is that anybody can apply anytime. It's a voluntary application. It's online. We can mail them and so forth. We have scoring systems or some way to evaluate the properties that are nominated. And then we go about pursuing matching funds. And one of the great benefits that I have running these township programs to have some money, but not a lot, is that we have all of the county that we can tap into, and we have the Greenbelt program as well, which covers a good part of Webster, a good part of Scioto, a good part of Northfield, and all of Ann Arbor Township. So we've had local partnerships and great collaboration and cooperation amongst the various local units. But then we also go after state and federal matching funds as well. So we've taken our money and matched that with other funds. And whenever programs are thinking about starting out, how can we do what you did? And I say, well, how much money do you got? And, anything, I say, well, if you got nothing, you're probably not going to get anything. But if you got something, it doesn't mean much. Webster's millage for 20 years now has generated, on average, $190,000. And if we're talking about development rights at $10,000 an acre, it don't get you very far. But if you can take your $200,000 and match that with a bunch of other ones, then you get somewhere. And in Webster, we've been successful in matching $1 of township funds with $5 from somewhere else. Wow. And that's why we've had such great success there. We have what we call the due diligence. We have the appraisal that I mentioned. We also hire a firm to do what's called a Phase 1 environmental site assessment to confirm that there isn't any hazardous waste on the property or reports of spills from the past. We have a boundary survey. We have attorneys that review these documents for us. And then one of the things that I do is what's called a baseline documentation report, where I produce maps and aerial photographs and descriptions of the property, and then I go around the property and take pictures to say, this is what the property looks like today. We sign a document that says, we agree, this is what it looks like. And so if I go back in a subsequent year and I find that there's a house there that's not supposed to be, an extreme example, but I was like, that house wasn't there, and I don't see it being permitted. It has to be removed. We haven't had that problem, but that's why we have a baseline report to say, we agree, this is what it looks like. And then ultimately we record this with the County Register of Deeds, and it runs with the property forever. So here's just some results from the programs that are in place now. As I said, Washtenaw County's program has been renewed twice from the original 2000 millage. It's a quarter mill, generates about $4.6 million. This it did in the first year of the renewal. They have conserved a lot of land, 9,000 acres. The Parks and Greenbelt program here in the city purchases easements. They've also contributed to funds to purchase properties either by Washtenaw County Parks or by Scioto Township as well. And there's some overlap because we all every time we put money into it, we all take credit for having conserved it. But the city has protected or been involved in protecting over 7,000 acres outside the city limits, and then added parkland in the city as well. Ann Arbor Township and the former treasurer Della DiPietro was here a moment ago, I saw. We've conserved almost 1,300 acres there, all in conservation easements. The township also acquired 150 acres and is leasing that out to farmers through a development proposal. And about 20% of the land there is in natural features. In Scioto Township, over 1,700 acres conserved. Scioto's bought land, but also bought easements. In fact, we bought so much land, the millage allows for the purchase of land, the original millage, for land preservation, but not the development of them. We can't put in parking areas or trails or anything like that. And so, because we had bought several properties as preserves, that catalyzed parks, pathways, and preserve millage that went on the ballot a few years ago. And so now there's funds to actually develop those properties with parking lots and kiosks and trails, and also to extend non-motorized trail networks throughout the township. And almost half of the land in Scioto Township is in natural features. In Webster, as I mentioned, over 2,700 acres, all conservation easements, about 30% in natural features. Not even $200,000 a year for nearly 20 years, but we've been able to leverage that 5-to-1. So here is a map of protected lands in Washtenaw County when these programs started 24 years ago. And up in the northwest corner there's the Pinckney and Waterloo State Recreation areas. Over in Sharon Township there is a state game area, a few conservation easement properties, and some county park properties outside the city of Ann Arbor, as well as ones within the city of Ann Arbor. So that's 2,000. Here's 20 years later. And I don't have a more recent slide, I wish I did, but just to give you an idea, I'd like to go back and forth a couple of times to say, this is what we've done.
Nice.
We added, I think it was the next slide say that? Yeah, almost 18,000 acres of conserved land in that 20-year period of time, and more since then, obviously. A third of it in public ownership that we can all go visit, and about 2/3 of it in private ownership through conservation easements. And as I said, we're still going. Webster's going to have a renewal on the ballot this year. SIO just renewed their proposal. The county just renewed their proposal. The Greenbelt program's got another 10 years under the current proposal. So one of the really satisfying things for me also is not just conserving farmland, excuse me, but is also sort of directing the land into new ownership. Conventional agriculture has its impacts. But it's still a viable enterprise here in the town or in the county. But we also like to see land move into new ownership and be engaged in more local food production. So in Ann Arbor Township, one of those properties is Green Things Farm, which is just north of the city. If you go north on Nixon Road, you cross over the expressway, it's on the left-hand side in Ann Arbor Township. This is a property that was owned by some investors, bought by investors. And after I worked on them for a number of years, they said, okay, we'll sell the conservation easement, but we want to sell this property. We're in our 70s, we just want to get rid of it now. So if you can find a buyer for us, then we'll sell the property and sell the easement. And so that was our first endeavor into saying, okay, how do we find buyers for things? And as I mentioned earlier, the township has this 150 acres that they've been leasing out to farmers, including some small-scale vegetable and flower producers. And a couple of those folks, let me just go back there, started Green Things Farm and had a successful business going and said, we need more land. And they stepped forward and bought the land. So again, we go back to our formula here where the land as a development property is worth $13,500 and as a conserved property is $3,500. We're paying the $10,000 difference or whatever it turns out to be. And then the land becomes much more affordable for any farmer to purchase. And in this case, it was a young couple, Nate and Jill Latta, and they were able to buy 63 acres all told, and they've been working that ground. They've got cattle out there, and they're growing vegetables. They sell at Argus Farm Stop. They have a booth at the farmer's market. They've got a roadside stand where you can go in and buy all kinds of stuff. It's really a remarkable operation, and that's facilitated by the programs that we've been working now for 20 years. In SIO Township, Nature and Nurture Seeds. This is on Marshall Road, just east of Baker Road. Another conservation easement property bought by a young couple because they could afford to buy the land. They have a seed company. So I'm getting all of my vegetable seeds from Nature and Nurture Seeds, locally grown seeds that are appropriate to our climate here in Washtenaw County. And then over in Webster Township, Shannon Bryan's, same kind of deal, had a good small-scale farm operation going on. I think it was actually his parents' property, not far from this place on Walsh Road, just east of Mast. And we bought an easement on 75 out of an 80-acre property, excluded the house and the buildings from that, and he stepped in and bought it for an affordable price, and now is running his organic farm operation out of there. He's at the Ann Arbor Farmers Market and Argus and various other places too. So it's really satisfying to see the shift from an older generation of farmers to a younger generation of farmers, and from conventional agriculture, in some cases at least, over into local food production. I think all these guys are organic also. So, questions?
Thank you so much, Barry, for that very informative presentation. Um, if we could, I'd like whoever has a question to speak into the microphone so it can be recorded and broadcast. So please put up your hands and I'll bring the microphone to you. Okay.
What are the options available if you live in the city of Ann Arbor and you have, we have 2 buildable lots with 100-year-old trees on them. What are our options?
I would think that the Parks and Greenbelt program would be viable for you. You can go to the Greenbelt website, and there should be an application available to you on site there. And they have funds to be able to buy your land. Whether it's of interest to them, I can't say, but that certainly is an option for you.
What do you give away? Our concern is we wouldn't want. We'd like to. We're getting sort of old, and we live in a historic house, and the land's there, and we like. And it's close to the university. We would like to retain the environment that's there right now. We don't want, all of a sudden a park there or something. Can you give away just the development right of it, and yet still retain the ownership and such as you talked about in the townships? Can you do that?
Yes, you can. And another option could be that you convey the development rights in one transaction and then convey what we call the fee simple interest, the title to the property, in a separate transaction to 2 different entities. So I've done a number of deals over the years where people had similar kinds of concerns. They didn't, they wanted I'm thinking of one in Pittsfield Township in particular, where the owner wanted to convey the property to the township, but they weren't convinced that the township was going to respect their desires. And so we set it up that the owner conveyed a conservation easement to the Southeast Michigan Land Conservancy, which is located in Superior Township, and then they conveyed the property to the township. So in most cases, I feel pretty comfortable about having public ownership of land. In some cases, if you want an extra layer of protection, you convey the development rights to one entity and then the property to another.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question.
Oh, Ray.
Yes, this is very interesting. I like what you're doing. Mary and I reformed farm kids, so this is very close to what we saw in our area in New York State.
Yeah.
But as a selling point, fundraising point, can you show how many farms you kept operating? The operating farms, if it's a good farmer, keep their land in good shape, preserve it nicely, keep it in good shape. Can you show how you've helped keep some farms operating, keeping some farms in good shape?
Yeah.
That's a good selling point.
Yeah. And I will say that I can't think of a single property agricultural property where we've bought the development rights and it's not still in some kind of production, whether it's a new owner growing flowers and vegetables or the current owner or whatever. The scoring systems that we have devised and the matching grants that we've tapped are geared toward really good agricultural soils, and those tend to stay in production.
Good.
We don't specify, in most cases, we don't specify that the farmland has to be put to an agricultural use.
Yep.
We certainly allow for that to happen and hope that it happens, but it's not a requirement. There's one property in Ann Arbor Township that was purchased after the easement was in place, and the owner has chosen to farm some of it. If you go north on Whitmore Lake Road, on the west side, there's a place called Slow Farm, where you can go actually pick your own vegetables. And that's a small part of a much larger property that was purchased for $2,900 an acre at auction. And it was her choice to plant the vast majority of the property into prairie grasses and let the land rest for a while. It could still be used for agricultural use in the future, but that was her choice. In Ann Arbor Township, we initiated a program that's now starting to filter out to other places, initially focused on smaller parcels, where in addition to all the prohibitions on division and construction and gravel pits and so forth, for I think it's properties smaller than 30 acres, the property has to, no, I'm sorry, 40 acres. The property has to be put to an agricultural use. Doesn't matter what it is, but they have to put it into some form of agricultural use. So in one case, it's corn and soybean rotation. In one case, it's a hay field. In one case, they're sort of transitioning to something new. So we give them a couple of years to do something new. But that's an unusual thing. There's only a couple of places in the country that are saying, okay, we'll give you money to buy this easement, but we don't want it just to grow up to brush, to autumn olive and invasive species and so forth. Yeah. We want the local agricultural economy to be supported. So it doesn't matter what you do with it, but you got to fill out this plan, and that's part of the monitoring then for the property, is to make sure that something of an agricultural use is being done on the property.
So the point is a real healthy, profitable farm is a good way to preserve. Then you can supplement that with some of your ideas.
Yeah.
Keep the operating farm with a good operation, profitable operation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that people have done when they have sold development rights is to buy more land. Yeah. So a lot of larger farmers are renting a lot of land that they work, and they're dependent on that. And if that land gets sold to a developer or somebody else who doesn't want to lease to that person anymore, that has a direct impact on their operation. And so those farmers have used their proceeds to buy other land to secure their operation more, or to invest in their operation also, to put up new buildings or whatever it might be, buy a new tractor. So it's a benefit in that regard also to support a particular individual operation.
Thank you for the good work.
Thank you. My pleasure.
A comment and a question. One of the great joys for Sal and me is to drive the countryside. We don't bike, we don't jog, but we drive it. But to go out in the countryside and to see what's happened 10, 20 years later, it is just magnificent. My question is farm economics, to build on Ray's. What are the emerging options for the farmers to get away from commodity crops, the soybean, the corn, to get into the food shed, to get into the Argus markets, to get into come pick your own, or other options for them?
Yeah, good question. The first thing that comes to mind, Peter, is Washtenaw County Conservation District. Just recently, within the last few months, started an organic transition program. So that's a place that I think any farmer can go to. It doesn't have to be a vegetable producer, if you will, to learn about how they can move their operation into those kinds of options. I think that's one of the things that somebody who has sold an easement, sold development rights on their property, can use the proceeds to do, to sort of retool the operation also. It's, you don't make a lot of money farming. You're lucky if you make ends meet most years, or many years anyway. And so if you have this influx of funds, you can either buy that tractor or buy the additional land or explore those kinds of other options. It's what's coming down the pike here, and so we hope that more people will take advantage of that. In the short term, I think in terms of if we ain't got the land, we can't do those kinds of things, and we're doing that with the land at this point, and looking for ways to encourage that kind of transition.
Barry, you mentioned Webster Township overcame a trailer park proposal. Citizens got involved, and I believe it ended up in preservation eventually.
Yes.
So question is, Ann Arbor Township is dealing with that right now.
Yes.
Do you see anything citizens can do, the Conservation District could do to put a stop to this? Because it's going to impact, that density is going to impact the water wells, which are already impacted, the septic fields, which are already a problem. So just curious
Yeah.
your thoughts on that.
Vehicle trips and so forth. So the questions about a property that's on Warren Road, the north side. Most of it is on the east side of US 23. There's one parcel on the west side as well. It has been zoned and planned for that kind of a use for 50 years, more than 50 years. And I believe that was a result of a proposal that was brought forth by another mobile home park developer back then. And the township opposed it. It went to court. There was a consent judgment that was passed that said that that land could be used for that purpose. It hadn't been approached until recently, and it's a real challenge. It's not just a pie in the sky thing. So to answer your question. I know a few other things that I probably shouldn't share in this location. It's more sensitive matters that the Township Board of Trustees is considering. One of the things that we have talked about is an extension of the township's millage, which, as I said, just had its last levy, this winter tax bill. As a means of being able to have additional funds to maybe buy a conservation easement on that property. But it's going to be pricey. The 13,000 minus 3,000 figure doesn't work in this case. When it's got that level, that density that's available to the property, I understand the township was going to get an appraisal. I have not seen the result of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's on the order of $50 or $60 or $70 or $80,000 an acre, minus 3,000 or 3,500. So a much bigger delta on that. I think that one of the things that the Ann Arbor Township citizens can do, if we get back on the ballot again, which I think there's a good chance of this November, is to vote, once again in favor of that proposal. It might be for another 10 years or 20 years, or it hasn't been decided yet. But I would also say express that concern to your elected representatives. So they're not sleeping on this. They're all over it, and it's a big challenge for them. So I think that they could use just sort of even moral support along those lines to say we support you in this, and whatever we can do to make something more positive happen out of that. It's a great property. It's got Traver Creek runs through the middle of it. It's got some nice woods on it. It's got good agricultural fields. It's got conserved farmland on the west and on the north. So it's right there in the middle of that block of 1,200 acres that we've been assembling in Ann Arbor Township. But you got to have a cooperative landowner or find some other means to get there. And that's the challenge that they have right now.
I just wanted to express how grateful I was for the local farmers during COVID, and I doubt I was alone, because we were hearing how all over the country people were struggling to get good food in the stores, and we could go a few blocks away to Argus or wherever and just have an abundance of beautiful local food. Yeah. So clearly having that on the outskirts of the city is a boon.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Great point. Yeah. That's one of the the emerging things that we're seeing from these programs, and we're going to run out of fuel at some point, so we got to have land near our cities to grow food on. So here we are.
We have time, I'm informed, for one more question, and that question is from Jane Pettit.
Thank you. I agree that I get an Argus box every couple of weeks.
Good for you.
And I was like, how do all these farms make it. And now I understand. But what I
In
wanted,
part because Bill and Kathy started that business. I mean, I don't
It's
know what the number is
awesome.
now. It's millions of dollars through Argus that has flowed into local farmers. I mean,
great.
all around the state. So, I mean, it's an enormous contribution. And I'll ask you a question, and I'll tell you a little quick story
well,
about Bill
I
and
just
Kathy,
want to know
too.
the other side of it is all this beautiful land that you say we can go visit and walk and whatever. How do we find where those are? Because I would make that a goal to go to every one of them.
Yeah, so the county's nature preserves are on their county parks website, and there's a map, and I think it's interactive, so you can just click on various properties. In Scioto Township, same way. It's got we don't have as many preserves. I think it's 4 all told, but that information's on the Scioto Township website as well. A quick story about Bill and Kathy. They bought a farm in Webster Township, a huge, beautiful farm on the south side of Strawberry Lake Road, and it borders on Walsh Road as well. It's 260 acres or something like that. Bill's family's had a cottage on Baseline Lake for decades, and they drove past this farm literally 1,000 times over the years, maybe more. Biking and running and all this kind of stuff. And so they, one day, said to themselves, boy, it would be awful if there was a subdivision there. I wonder who owns that property. And they tracked down the owner. You can go to the county website and click on ownership and see who owns it. Contacted the guy. He was in New York City, I think it was. He was an heir to the family and so forth. It was owned by the Rosenfeld farm, and Carl Rosenfeld started Carl's Chop House in Detroit.
Oh, wow.
And that's where he raised his cattle that was then served at Carl's Chop House.
Wow.
And then I don't know all the details. He passed away, and then this guy who's one of these, I call him parachute CEOs, where company's in trouble and he comes in and cleans house and gets them profitable again, and then he moves on to the next one. So he was in New York. They contacted him. He said, well, you should contact this guy Lonik, because I've been in contact with him also. And so that's how I met Bill and Kathy. And then they ended up buying that farm from the guy. And then we ended up buying a conservation easement on the property. So I think we're at 237 out of 250 or whatever it is. They excluded some area around their buildings. But the vast majority of this beautiful rolling landscape is conserved. With a beautiful woods that's next to the U of M property. And they wanted it to be regenerated to pasture. And I don't know how they did this, but they put out a call, and there was a young fellow from Iowa, I believe it was, that had a herd of cows, and he literally put them on a truck and drove them here. And now he's farming that property. And his beef, it's John Cox is his name. I can't remember the name of his business. It's Baseline Farm. That might be on there. But he's at the Ann Arbor Farmers Market too. He's at Argus and so forth. And that's beef that's grown on their property. So in addition to the tremendous contributions that they made through Argus, they also did this amazing thing with their property as well. So, yeah.
Barry, thank you so much for that inspiring story and for all of your contributions. I know there were some people who still had questions, so I'm sure that Barry would be happy to answer them. But thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, Barry, for such a wonderful talk.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much.